For 25 years, the SR-71 Blackbird was a ghost. It was a machine built of titanium and secrets, flying so high that its pilots wore spacesuits and so fast that it could outrun the sunrise. To the Americans, it was invincible. To the Soviets, it was a constant, humiliating reminder that the sky did not belong to them. They fired over 4,000 missiles at it. They scrambled their fastest MiGs to catch it. They never touched it, not once. The Blackbird was simply too fast. But in the frozen skies over the Baltic Sea, there was one group of pilots who didn't care about the American speed records. They were neutral. They were quiet. And they were flying a jagged, delta-winged fighter that looked like it was built in a garage. In January 1986, the impossible happened. The Blackbird pilots, comfortable in their belief that nothing could touch them, suddenly heard a sound that made their blood run cold. It was the solid, screaming tone of a radar lock. Someone hadn't just caught them. Someone had them in the kill box. Welcome to Hidden Valor. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from? To understand how a small Scandinavian nation managed to do what the entire Soviet Union could not, we have to go back to the height of the Cold War. The year is 1980. The world is split in two. On one side, you have NATO. On the other, the Warsaw Pact. And right in the middle, sitting uncomfortably between these two nuclear superpowers, is Sweden. Sweden was armed neutrality. They knew that if World War III started, their airspace would become the highway for Soviet bombers heading to London and American bombers heading to Moscow. They needed an air force that could punch well above its weight. They didn't need to project power across the globe like the Americans. They just needed to defend their own backyard. While the world watched the standoff between the US and the USSR, a daily ritual was taking place in the stratosphere. It was called the Baltic Express. Every week, the SR-71 Blackbird would take off from RAF Mildenhall in England. It would climb to 70,000 feet, accelerate to Mach 3, and scream east. It would fly a specific loop, skirting the edges of Soviet airspace, taking high-resolution radar images of their nuclear submarine bases in Latvia and Estonia. For the Soviet Air Defense Forces, this was a weekly nightmare. They could see the Blackbird on their radar screens, a massive blip moving at 3,500 kilometers per hour. They would scramble their best interceptor, the MiG-25 Foxbat. The Foxbat was a beast. It was crude, powerful, and incredibly fast. It was designed specifically to kill the Blackbird. But the Soviets always made the same mistake. They tried to chase the Blackbird. It sounds logical, right? If you want to catch a car, you drive up behind it. But at Mach 3, the physics of air combat break down. By the time the Soviet MiG controllers saw the Blackbird on radar and scrambled the alert fighters, the SR-71 was already hundreds of miles away. The MiGs would take off, light their afterburners, and try to perform what is called a stern conversion, turning in behind the target to fire a missile. But the math was brutal. To catch a plane moving at Mach 3 from behind, you need to be doing Mach 3.5 or Mach 4. The MiG-25 could barely hit Mach 2.8 before its engines started to melt. They were chasing a Ferrari with a dump truck. The Blackbird pilots would just watch the warning lights on their dashboard, smile, and push the throttle forward. They would leave the Soviets in the dust every single time. The Americans got cocky. They began to believe the Blackbird was untouchable. They thought the only thing that could kill an SR-71 was a mechanical failure. But the Swedes were watching. The Swedish Air Force, unlike the Soviets, realized that chasing the Blackbird was a fool's game. You cannot catch it from behind. The only way to kill it is to meet it face to face. This is where the Saab 37 Viggen comes in. If the SR-71 was a graceful arrow, the Viggen was a hammer. It was a single-engine fighter designed with one purpose: to take off from short, snowy roads in the middle of a Swedish forest, climb vertically, and unleash hell on incoming bombers.
It was rough, it was loud, it was the first aircraft to use a computer to link with ground radar systems. The Swedish tactical planners analyzed the Baltic Express. They noticed a pattern. The Americans were creatures of habit. The SR-71 flew the same route at the same time, entering the Baltic Sea through a narrow corridor of international airspace between the Swedish island of Gotland and the coastline. The Swedes realized they didn't need to be faster than the Blackbird, they just needed to be on time. The strategy was terrifyingly simple. It was a head-on intercept. Imagine two bullets fired at each other. The SR-71 is traveling at Mach 3. The Viggen is traveling at Mach 2. That is a combined closing speed of Mach 5. That is 1 mile every single second. If the Swedish pilot turns 1 second too late, he misses the intercept by miles. If he turns 1 second too early, he ends up behind the target. If he pulls up a few degrees too shallow, the Blackbird passes over him. If he pulls up too steep, he stalls. It required perfect coordination between the pilot and the ground controller. January 1986. The radar screens at the Swedish Air Defense Center light up. The Ghost is back. The SR-71 is inbound, flying the loop. Per Olaf Eld is sitting in the cockpit of his JA-37 Viggen at a base in southern Sweden. The scramble alarm sounds. He fires up the Volvo flag motor engine. The afterburner kicks in with a force that pins him to his seat. He isn't taking off from a massive concrete runway. He is roaring off a small dispersal strip. The ground controller vectors him out over the freezing gray water of the Baltic. Eld pushes the throttle to Zone 3, full afterburner. The Viggen accelerates past the speed of sound. He climbs steeply. He isn't looking for the Blackbird with his eyes. He's looking at his data link. The ground controller is guiding him to a precise point in the sky. A mathematical X marks the spot. At 35,000 feet, Eld levels off. He's doing Mach 2. High above him, at 71,000 feet, the SR-71 is screaming towards him. The American pilots are checking their fuel, monitoring their inlet spikes, completely unaware of the ambush set for them. Then Eld pulls the nose up. He enters a ballistic climb, trading his speed for altitude. He points the nose of the Viggen almost vertically, aiming directly at the flight path of the Blackbird.
He switches his radar to active. The Viggen had a secret weapon, the PS-46 radar. It was a pulse Doppler radar that could filter out the ground clutter and lock onto targets flying much higher and faster than itself. Eld watches his scope. A blip appears. It's moving incredibly fast. His thumb hovers over the weapon release button. He selects his weapon, the RB-71 Skyflash missile. This was a British-made, radar-guided missile. It was capable of snapping up and hitting targets 10,000 feet above the launch aircraft. The closing speed is insane. The distance counter on his HUD is unwinding like a blur. 40 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 20 kilometers. And then the tone. A solid, continuous beep fills Eld's headset. The square box on his HUD snaps onto the Blackbird. Lock. In the cockpit of the SR-71, the tranquility is shattered. The radar warning receiver, which usually stayed silent or gave lazy chirps from distant Soviet radars, suddenly lights up like a Christmas tree. The threat ring flashes red. The American pilots jolt. This isn't a search radar. This is a fire control radar. Someone has a lock. Someone is about to shoot. But there is nothing they can do. They can't turn. At Mach 3, a hard turn would tear the airframe apart. They can't accelerate. They are already at the limit. They are staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. Eld holds the lock. He has a firing solution. He could press the button and turn the world's most expensive aircraft into a cloud of titanium confetti. The two aircraft pass each other by. Eld looks up through his canopy. For a split second, against the dark purple of the stratosphere, he sees it, the black shape, the long neck, the twin engines glowing hot. It is there, and then it is gone.
The SR-71 screams past him, thousands of feet above. The shockwave hits the Viggen a few seconds later, rocking the Swedish jet. Eld breaks his lock. He banks his fighter away and dives back towards the safety of Swedish airspace. He didn't fire. He didn't need to. He had proven the point. The Americans were stunned. When they landed back in England, they debriefed the mission data. The tapes confirmed it. A Swedish fighter had achieved a full kill solution. The Ghost had been busted. But this rivalry didn't stay hostile. In fact, just a year later, the relationship between the Viggen and the Blackbird changed forever. It was June 29, 1987. Another SR-71, flown by Lieutenant Colonel Dwayne Knoll and Tom Veltri, was on the Baltic Express run. They were deep in the loop, near Soviet territory. Suddenly, disaster struck. The right engine exploded. The J-58 engine is a massive, complex piece of machinery. When it failed at Mach 3, it was catastrophic. The aircraft violently yawed to the right. The pilot wrestled with the stick to keep it from disintegrating. They had to decelerate immediately. They dropped out of supersonic speed. They fell from 70,000 feet down to 25,000 feet. They were limping. They were slow. And worst of all, they had drifted into Swedish airspace. This was a nightmare scenario. A top-secret U.S. spy plane, full of classified sensors, crashing or being forced down in neutral Sweden, or worse, drifting into Soviet airspace, where the hungry MiGs were waiting to finish what they started. The Swedish air defense radar saw the Blackbird drop. They saw it deviate from its course. They scrambled the Viggens. But this time, the order wasn't to target, it was to investigate. 2 Viggens, flown by Roger Moeller and Christer Sjöberg, blasted off. They intercepted the crippled Blackbird. They pulled up alongside it. The American pilots looked out their windows. They saw the triangular wings of the Swedish jets. They were terrified. Were the Swedes going to force them to land? Were they going to shoot them down for violating their borders? The Swedish pilots looked at the damaged bird. They saw one engine was out. They saw the Americans were struggling. And in that moment, the Cold War politics melted away. There is an unwritten rule in the sky. When a pilot is in trouble, he is not an enemy, he is a brother. The Swedish jets didn't arm their weapons. Instead, they moved into a formation. They positioned themselves between the Blackbird and the Soviet border. The Soviet MiGs had launched. They were coming. They smelled blood. They wanted to capture the Blackbird or shoot it down and claim the wreckage. But when the Soviet radar operators looked at their screens, they didn't just see a wounded spy plane. They saw a wounded spy plane protected by 2 fully armed, very aggressive Swedish Viggens. The Swedes escorted the Blackbird all the way across the Baltic. They stayed with it until Danish F-16s could take over. They ensured the secret aircraft made it home safely. For decades, this story was classified. The intercepts, the radar locks, the rescue, it was all hidden in top-secret folders in Stockholm and Washington. It wasn't until 2018, over 30 years later, that the truth was officially revealed. In a ceremony in Stockholm, the U.S. Air Force finally presented the Air Medal to the Swedish pilots. It was a rare moment where the U.S. military admitted that not only had they been beaten by the Swedes, but they had been saved by them. The SR-71 Blackbird is now a museum piece. It sits silent in hangars across America. The Viggen has also been retired, replaced by the Gripen. But if you look closely at the history books, you will find a small footnote that defies the legend. The Blackbird was the fastest plane in the world. But on a cold winter day in 1986, a pilot named Per Olof Eld proved that speed isn't everything. Sometimes you just need a good radar, a lot of nerve, and the courage to fly straight into the face of a bullet. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to Hidden Valor for more.